All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We are diving back in time to June 1936, and our guide is just a single document, a letter to an editor. But this isn't just any letter. It lays out a really detailed, data-driven argument about what was known back then as the Palestine Land Question. So let's see what this one voice from the past has to say.
So the letter doesn't waste any time. It jumps right in and confronts this exact claim, a really powerful narrative that was shaping the entire debate at the time. The author's goal here isn't just to say, I disagree. It's to try and systematically take this idea apart, piece by piece, using the official data that was available back then.
And just to be clear, our goal here isn't to judge history, it's to try and understand it. We're going to unpack this specific counterargument, just as it was made almost 90 years ago. Why? To see for ourselves how these competing narratives were already shaping the conflict way back then.
Okay, so the author's first move is to go straight to the data. Instead of making some kind of emotional appeal, they challenge the whole displacement idea with cold, hard numbers, pulled directly from official government reports of the era.
First up, the author starts with a figure that was pretty well known at the time. A report by Sir John Hope Simpson estimated there were about 30,000 rural Arab families who were landless. Now, this number represents the total scale of the problem from all causes.
But then the author drills down, and this is the key move. They point to a 1933 government inquiry that actually investigated the cause of displacement, and its finding that only 570 Arab families were displaced specifically because of Jewish land purchases. And this chart illustrates the author's core statistical point perfectly. They basically do the math for us. 570 out of 30,000 is just 1.9%. So the crucial argument they're making is that, according to these sources, the vast majority of Arab landlessness had nothing to do with Jewish land acquisition.
And the author doesn't stop there. They dig even deeper into that 570 number, arguing that it's more complicated than it looks. They claim that about half of these families weren't even cultivators, they weren't farmers, and that many were Bedouin from a couple of specific areas, which they argue suggests a whole different kind of connection to the land than that of a settled farmer.
All right, so that's the numbers argument. Now, let's move on to the author's second major point, which shifts the focus from who was on the land to the actual condition of the land itself.
Right here, the author paints a really stark before and after picture. They contend that a lot of the land that was purchased wasn't this thriving, beautiful farmland at all. In their words, it was waste, desert, and swamp. Land that only became what they call good soil after it was bought and developed.
So how did this massive transformation happen? Well, the letter is very clear on this point. It wasn't magic. It was the result of a ton of effort. Intense physical labor by Jewish workers, financial contributions from Jewish communities all over the world, and, as the letter puts it pretty grimly, the sacrifice of life in the incredibly dangerous work of draining malarial swamps.
Okay, so this all leads us to the author's third point. If land wasn't just taken, but actually transformed from waste to farmland, what was the economic ripple effect on the Arab population? Now, this is a pretty bold economic claim. The letter argues that instead of making Arab landowners poorer, the sale of this so-called wasteland at what the author calls fantastically high prices actually gave them a massive source of capital to improve the lands they still owned. The author then uses Wadi Hawareth as a case study. They claim that on land where 200 Arab families once lived, Jewish settlement now supported a grand total of 4,500 families. That's 1,500 Jewish settlers plus another 3,000 people in related jobs. The author presents this as a story of economic multiplication, not subtraction.
And they broaden this one example into a general rule. The author asserts that if you actually looked at the population data from the time, you'd see that the non-Jewish population was growing fastest right next to areas of Jewish settlement. The implication? That these settlements were like engines of regional economic growth for everybody. So now we get to what is probably the most complex part of the letter. It's an argument not about Arabs as one single group, but about different Arab social classes. To really get the author's point here, you have to understand how they saw the existing social structure. They use this really powerful biblical phrase to argue that the average Arab peasant, the fellah, was essentially an exploited worker, trapped in debt to a small class of wealthy Arab landowners known as the Effendi. And here's the crucial argument the author makes. Jewish settlement didn't affect everyone the same way.
Not at all. They argue the Effendi elite actually lost power. The peasant masses, on the other hand, saw their economic position improve. And the nomadic Bedouin? Well, they were forced to change their lifestyle. According to this letter, it's not one story. It's at least 3 different stories.
And this all leads to the letter's big political conclusion. So why was there so much opposition to what was happening? Well, according to this author, the opposition was being stirred up and organized by the Effendi class, not because the peasants were actually being harmed, but because the Effendis themselves were afraid of losing their privileged position and their power to exploit the masses. So after walking through the statistics, the land transformation, the economics, and the social analysis, what's the core thesis of this one letter from 1936? Let's boil it down.
Let's pull it all together. The author's whole argument really unfolds in 4 clear steps. First, the data. The claim about displacement is statistically overblown. Second, the land. It was transformed from useless waste into valuable soil by Jewish labor. Third, the economics. This created regional growth, not harm. And fourth, society. The peasant masses actually benefited, while the old elite lost their power.
Look, this has been just one argument. It's a snapshot from a single letter written in a deeply, deeply contentious time. It obviously doesn't give us the whole picture, but it does show us the architecture of a very specific viewpoint. It reminds us that behind the big, sweeping statements that often define historical conflicts, there are always these detailed, passionate arguments that are worth understanding on their own terms. The question it leaves us with is this: how does hearing a single, confident voice like this, in its full context, change how we approach the immense complexities of the story, both then and now?